good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So welcome to another week at the IFA Global Cafe. My name is Kara Cruz, and today I'm very excited to be introducing you all to Miss Stephanie de Chassy on the topic of voice and meaningful engagement as a part of multi-generational approaches. So as a bit of background on our incredible guest, Stephanie has a Master's of Business Administration from the American Graduate School of International Management in Phoenix, Arizona, as well as a marketing degree from École Supérieure du Commerce de Toulouse. Apologies for my French, in France. She combines her private sector experience in telecommunications and financial services, first in France and then in the USA, with 16 years of work in the international development sector. After working in Washington, D.C. for 15 years, she spent 2 years in Orissa, India, as an organizational development advisor for a small grassroots organization before consulting for the World Bank in South Asia, followed by a move to Oxford to join Oxfam for 10 years in various leadership roles. These roles included governance, active citizenship, gender justice, and fiscal justice. Her expertise includes strategic planning, program and team management, and facilitation of business processes and organizational change. She is passionate about citizen involvement in decision-making processes, and in particular that of young people. And she is currently an independent consultant based in the UK, primarily working with HelpAge International as a voice advisor and WHO as a voice and meaningful engagement advisor. Part of her scope of work includes documenting practices and supporting small pilots of intergenerational approaches in various countries. So thank you, Stephanie, very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So as we can see from your bio, you've had quite a varied career. How did you become interested in advocating for individuals to be given a voice in decision-making processes? And then how did you go about making this into a career?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Often people ask me that question. Well, as you can see from my bio, I was in a lot of different roles in either headquarters, private sector, but often I sat in an office for many years. And I realized that the only way to grasp really the reality of poverty, exclusion, marginalization was not just reading about it, but being on the ground. So that's how I decided to do a volunteer stint in Orissa in India. And this organization I worked with was working with tribal communities in different parts of Orissa, and really created some safe spaces for them to come together, to be heard, to engage with the local decision makers. And I saw that as a tremendous value as an end in itself. But it's hard to do. It's very micro level, but it's also essential to build the confidence of individuals, their understanding of their rights, their collective voice when they come together. And they gain essential tools so they can achieve other rights, like their right to health, to food, to water, etc. So that's how I decided to make it a part of my professional goal, but also personal goal.
I'm sure it's been a both rewarding but challenging career. So you speak about this kind of creation of safe spaces, but what does it mean for someone to have a voice? So how do we both learn from individual voices and perspectives without perpetuating this understanding of, say, older people being a homogenous population, because we know that's not true?
Right. So I may be stating the obvious here, especially because of everyone on this call, I'm sure, have their own experiences and knowledge. But for me, having a voice is related to being invited or creating safe spaces, have the opportunity, but also the support to express needs, opinions, become more informed, hence more confident to take part of decision making that affect their own lives. So it's this idea in our development jargon of agency, of self-worth, of gaining the knowledge, but also the importance of having control and having a say in how you evolve in your own life. We know, and I've learned this since I joined HelpAge and WHO, that it's very unfortunate that the lack of disaggregated data means that often we sort of bundle people beyond 60 years old into one category. But when we dig into it, when we are looking at the very specific needs, characteristics based on age, gender, social background, race, caste in the case of India, sexual preferences, the differences, the individual particularities of individual have to be taken into account. Otherwise, they feel forgotten. That's when the idea of ageism come in. They feel they are treated as just one single group without any individual characteristic. So an intersectional approach is really critical. And we need to collect, to advocate for better data collection and better taking into account the importance of this these different lenses and this intersectional view of different groups of individuals.
Certainly, thank you for that. So intergenerational or multi-generational activities, it's kind of a self-explanatory concept in the name, but could you speak more to how these activities can reduce ageism? We saw that this was a recommendation in the WHO's Global Report on Ageism. So yeah, could you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so as we all know probably on this call, ageism relates to how we think, feel, and act. So the stereotypes, the prejudices, and then discrimination that we feel as older people or younger people as well, because it's not just for older people, and it can be directed towards us, or it can be self-directed. So while in some contexts, intergenerational connections are quite organic, and it's part of the culture as families live together. We obviously have seen, demographic and lifestyles changes, massive urban migration, especially young people pushed by the need to alternative livelihoods, especially from rural areas where climate change has really damaged the opportunities for young people. So families who maybe were working together, connecting, are more fragmented. The pressure of poverty, insecurity, inequality builds up, creates more misunderstanding, tensions, and then the prejudices, the preconceived ideas can also build up across generations. So creating these spaces and engaging younger people and older people in dialogues. And sometimes it's important to do it first separately, to really value the listening, in a sort of a neutral space, to share ideas, but also experiences, because even younger people may not have lived more than 20, 25 years if they are part of the group, but they have their own experiences that have to be valued. And obviously older people have a whole history of knowledge and experience, and then build common understanding on issues that they are all facing, but maybe experiences differently. And at times they can also come up with constructive solutions that they can maybe implement at the very grassroots level. So this can break communication barriers that have been built over months or years, and prejudices, and lead to strong mutual understanding. And it's important that it's done sometimes as an end in itself. And all these are really important ingredients to combat ageism and lead to even like a phenomenon of reconciliation if there has been some quite acute tensions between generation and sort of a blaming culture.
Yeah, certainly. And I like how you broke that down, the kind of the various ways in which maybe generations aren't connected, and the various reasons why it's good that they do be connected. So the WHO's Connecting Generations Guide, it's a fantastic resource that I believe is in the chat at the moment, that maps out the steps to planning, implementing, and evaluating an intergenerational project. Could you provide us with a bit of an overview of those steps?
Yes. So the way they are laid out gives not only the steps, but gives also case studies, practical examples, and then helpfully some tools. And the steps reflect really good programming, like many of you probably are doing project and programs. It's based, because it's WHO, on strong evidence, and it hasn't been easy to collect good evidence for this manual. There's not enough out there, but also, very importantly, a do no harm approach. That has been unearthed through the whole research. Is some of the projects that have been implemented in the past, if they are developed in a more top-down approach, without enough of a risk analysis, of really understanding the motivations of different members of the project, can lead to more harm than good. So that is a very strong underlying principle under the different steps. Obviously, the context is each context is very, very different. So starting from strong values and really paying attention to key principles before jumping into program design is also quite critical about what we are trying to do, on which values are we basing our the interventions and the activities that we will be rolling out. The first step is in the planning part, so that's the very first step. There's a strong emphasis on analysis. So starting from what is it we're trying to change through the project. So it could be like a big picture aim, like we want to combat ageism in this particular context, on this particular community, or something more practical, a more practical change in the dynamics of groups, or engage more into joint agriculture activity, or more cultural activities. So being clear about what we're trying to change, and then do from there a lot of analysis of who are the stakeholders, what WHO calls the resources and assets that we currently have. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to create groups or gatherings or associations that already exist. We just want to leverage them. And then, based on our understanding of who are the stakeholders, the power relations, so do a power analysis. How are we going to design an engagement strategy of the different stakeholders, and importantly, older people and younger people? Who should be part of the group? How are we articulating the change we're trying to create? So in some program management talk, we talk about the theory of change. and how we're going to measure that change through a monitoring and an evaluation plan and indicators. So all this planning phase is extremely important, especially in order to create that change, have an impact, and in the spirit of constructive engagement and do no harm. So that's quite, I think, is quite specific about this intergenerational type of project. The second big step is the implementation. So again, pay particular attention of what is the sequence. Sometimes we don't want to bring older people and younger people together too quickly. We need to work with them separately, understand their motivation, their concerns, their fears. They need to understand each other a bit separately and then coming together. What will be their role? It has to be adapted to the capacities of different individuals, their ability to engage, the time commitments they have, a lot of considerations, again, along the line of the do no harm and don't be too top down. So it takes time. The whole project cycle can take months and months and months to plan in a participatory way. The implementation can take also a lot of time until we actually reach impact. The evaluation part is also very important because, as I said, there's not much evidence. And collectively, all of us engaging into these kind of activities need to contribute to build a body of evidence of what works, what doesn't work. So we can be a lot more, a lot better at doing this kind of programming and help each other to be more relevant.
Perfect. Thank you. I have so many questions that are coming up from that really precise outlining of all the steps, but I'm going to go to one of our regular contributors, Shmuel. So his question is, how can voice and meaningful engagement support the improvement of well-being of older adults in poor and low socioeconomic groups?
The well-being, that is a really good question. As we get older, some people, especially in low and vulnerable segments of the population, lose a lot of their self-worth. They're not only their ability to connect with others, but they are feeling disconnected. They may suffer from ageism and prejudices and even violent or neglectful behaviors from others. And as if we are protecting these, I keep talking about these spaces where older people feel they can raise their concerns, their needs, and it starts very much at the needs level. And if they are being listened to and heard, and when I say heard, that means someone is doing something about it, then they are building this self-worth and this sort of power within to be a bit more vocal, to be more proactive in contributing to decision within the household, at the family level, so they are better valued as contributors to the family, but of course in a community level all the way to even the national level. So for me, that's why it's so important to be very thoughtful about creating, protecting these spaces, and be careful of who is in the space, whose voice is better heard, whose voice is maybe a proxy voice, and try as much as possible to be genuine about our intent and not extractive.
Thank you.
I hope that answered the question.
It certainly did for me, but raised a bit of a follow-up question. Do you find that there's a difference in how younger and older people respond to being in a space where they have a voice? So you spoke about how for some projects you have younger people meet first and older people meet as well, and then they come together. So in your experience, has there been a difference in the kind of dynamics of those groups and what it's like for them to come together?
Yeah, we actually have a very fresh experience because I'm currently working with colleagues from Uganda and Nepal on like a pilot project where we held dialogues for separately younger people and older people, both in urban and rural context in Uganda and then in Nepal, um, on their experience and their coping mechanism facing climate change. And we first worked with younger people and older people separately, and then just the last couple of weeks we brought them together, and we had this great learning event on Wednesday. Behaviors are very, very different. Younger people obviously have less deep knowledge about maybe historic factors, but they have their own perception, their own ability to look for solutions, through social media, through their network, their connection, their ability to maybe have access to education. There's more hope. They are coming into these spaces with a lot of curiosity. In some instances and some more complicated contexts, they may blame either older people for not listening to them, take them into account, wanting to impose their traditions, not preparing enough, not for future generations to live with the same positive environment than they used to have. But there is the curiosity, there is the hope, and they are solution orientated. Older people very excited to come together as a group separately to share their stories. It's a lot about storytelling, a lot about reminiscing about good old times, but also sharing their very creative coping mechanisms. And when they come together and when they've been prepared separately to engage with each other, we were actually ourselves quite struck by how the level of engagement and excitement and the animosity just vanished. And there was respect, there was a strong listening and debate, but they did spend time together to listen to each other and then try to come up with solutions that they would probably want to explore together. But that's the next phase. But for now, there was just a deep exploration of the root causes of what is happening to us. How are we coping at the moment? What does that mean in terms of our culture, our economic situation? So it became way beyond the environment and the climate, which is not a concept they all fully understand, but the change in the environment. But they talked about social norms, they talk about changes in the culture, changing in the economic situation, opportunities. So it went beyond just a dialogue on climate.
Yeah, that's
So
really
lots of great
fascinating.
surprises.
Yeah, that shared ownership of experiences that they're all going through.
Yeah.
Um, so you are the main author of Help Age International's Bringing Generations Together for Change Intergenerational Guide, also in the chat. Are there any case studies that you feel particularly demonstrate how intergenerational activities positively impact both older people and younger people?
Yeah, so there are 10 case studies, and for me, all of them would probably demonstrate that point. It's just I can say it's a very, it complements the manual that WHO has developed, because it's based on practitioners' example and projects. So it didn't have this the aim to do the same thing. So they do they do different things. The guide I wrote in 2021 was really focused on the practice that's already existing, and what are the principles and the learning we can get from that. Maybe as an illustration, I could mention the case study in South Sudan. That was a bit extreme because we looked at the community conflict that was triggered by sometimes the difference of perception between younger people and older people on really how to cope with economic pressures in particular. Older people being very traditional and believing that young people are not listening to them anymore. They are not following the traditions. They're not respecting them. They are resorting to violence and killing of people from other villages, maybe from different ethnic background, resorting to cattle raiding, and not understanding why they are not following the traditions, and young people blaming older people for not realizing the pressures they're under, survival mode they have to they have to face. So when we brought them together through a very the facilitation had to be conflict sensitive, and used I wasn't there myself, but they used some approaches on peace and conflict mitigation. So it was quite it requires a very particular set of skills, and that's one thing that we found. You can't just improvise yourself as a facilitator to these groups without very sharp skills and understanding the way to work with older people and the way to work with younger people. They came to the realization that actually there had been a break in the communication, and when they started engaging with each other slowly, realizing the constraints that each groups had, there was a form of reconciliation, of breakthrough on we need to work in a more peaceful environment. Violence doesn't lead to any good outcomes for anyone. So as it was a project, like many of these projects, quite short, I think it was a year, and the funding ran out, that's when you see the limitations of this kind of short-term project. And that's when you're thinking, okay, am I doing more harm than anything else? Because the initial result was really positive, but then it has to be maintained and sustained, and then other issues being tackled. Because having a very positive dialogue doesn't mean we are alleviating the economic pressures of what young people are facing. So that was one case study that was really interesting. And all the case studies are on the HelpAge website. Maybe another one is in Chile, there's a university that during the COVID time started to engage students to do research on what have been the implication of COVID on older people. And the students developed also a participatory methodology together with their professors, and engaged older people. And there's been lots of sort of organic initiatives between the groups, and a lot of preconceived ideas about each other that have sort of vanished as they were engaging together. And all the people did a lot of writing. Younger people have compiled this into like a report, even a book, I think. And then when they could, they were engaging online and then eventually physically. And what was interesting is that a lot of these concepts of intergenerational ageism sort of got embedded into the broader curriculum. And there was this particular center that, focusing on these intergenerational connections. So it went way beyond this ad hoc engagement or research project during COVID. And I think a lot of the younger people have continued to be really engaged with the theme. And there was also a group of young women and older women who have tackled particularly violence against women and developed some advocacy and campaigning activities after they had these dialogues.
Thank you. So before, I'm going to ask Anna Maria to perhaps unmute and ask or reflect on her experience being in an intergenerational project. Anna Maria, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about your experience?
Thank you very much. Yes, for sure. I belong to the Senior Planet. It's an American organization that provides different activities for seniors from Monday to Friday, almost all day long. Great example for Canada, where to learn from, because we in Canada, I feel that we are to a certain degree very neglected. And I got an invitation to participate in this intergenerational project with the students from California State University. And I show interest because I think it's very valuable to interact with younger people and see their perceptions and what I expected from life. So it has been a great experience because she's a sociology student, the one I had been assigned to me, and she wants to pursue her master in social work, focusing on working on older adults. So she has been a great listener, a very interesting question about my experience before I retire and after my retirement. And one thing that caught my attention, it was what message want to deliver to younger generations. And she focused, she said, it could be either your past experience as a full-time, having a full-time job, or what do you think that is so important for you to work as a volunteer? Because I do a lot of volunteer work. And that it was important to express that feeling to younger people that working as a volunteer is not only an opportunity to acquire skills, but rather to enrich their life of learning from older adults, what we have done. So very interesting project. I'm very happy to have that great opportunity because it's inspiring at the same time, because you don't find these days younger people interested in working with older adults, So I find that very rewarding because it's a learning experience for both of us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think a project like that, it creates the opportunity. So perhaps not always, it's not younger people not wanting to interact with older adults, but not knowing how to, which I think is really interesting.
Exactly. Sorry to interrupt you. Exactly, because there was invitation, and I don't think that all seniors replied. It was kind of I think there was a little bit of shortage of seniors for students, even though there are a lot of seniors, but sometimes perhaps they feel intimidated. And so, but no, at least we have a kickoff and the students were very kind. It's because sometimes we feel intimidated towards each other, some because of technology, other because they're fast and reaction, younger generation, but it's fast, quick. But no, so this is a very, I think that these are the opportunities that one have to take advantage of. Not feel intimidated, but rather learn from them.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that idea of recognizing that perhaps it's slightly intimidating, but then going for it anyways.
Yes.
Thank you. Glad to hear that you had such a positive experience. And I see, Mark, you've been posting different intergenerational organizations and practices. So thank you very much, as always. The IFA is always very grateful for your wealth of knowledge. So Stephanie, when we met earlier this week, we spoke about the dynamic between global organizations and the local partners that they work with to implement initiatives such as intergenerational activities. Could you speak to how the voices of local partners are integrated into these initiatives, and what are some of those challenges in supporting their engagement?
Yeah, no, thank you for this question. And I'd love to hear also from the audience how they experience that. As you probably know, all of you have been and probably are involved in this debate about localization and shifting power, so all these terms. Looking at the faces to see if people are nodding, but we've been involved in HelpAge. And when I was in Oxfam before, of a lot, how do we shift this power? And it's not just about fundraising and the relationship between the grantee and grantor, but it's also about knowledge and about appreciating and valuing different type of knowledge. Not maybe conceptual knowledge, but experiential knowledge of people on the ground. So for me, there's a lot of unlearning to do in these relationship. And I think we need to invest time in really engaging constructively with local organizations, ideally, groups of older people themselves, understanding where they're coming from. How do we combine learning and share it in a more equal way, and also be very transparent and open about the constraints. Obviously, fundraising, donor requirements are a barrier to really this more fluid shifting power. Because even if we are trying to support young local organization to raise money, have access to funds, sometimes their financial systems, their procurement systems are not up to the standard of donors. So it's been an ongoing issue, and it will take time. But I think the first is have to drop also the preconceived ideas, and how would we value the forms of knowledge, and then just bring people together. So this learning event we had on Wednesday, it's fresh in my mind. We had the local facilitators of the dialogues, the local organization. We partnered with Restless Development, which is a youth-led organization, and they had their colleague from Nepal and Uganda. We had different level of people in HelpAge, and the level of interest and commitment was shared among everyone, and the contribution. And it was quite fluid. And so, again, it is about creating spaces. And it's not sort of intuitive for everyone, but as long as we are clear about what we're trying to achieve jointly, and make sure all the interests are taken into account, I think there's a lot of value in finding mechanisms to slowly shift that power, and while maintaining mutual accountability, and be clear about roles and responsibilities now and then in the future.
Thank you. So speaking of the future, earlier you were talking about how there perhaps is a bit of a paucity of evidence on the impact of intergenerational activities. Do you know if there's any evidence or even just reflections on the long-term implications of participating in an intergenerational activity?
What do you mean by the long term?
So beyond, so you spoke about, say, the project in South Sudan that lasted approximately a year.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's ever been research, like follow-up of 5 years later, are those participants still in contact together?
No.
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 So perhaps
No,
that's something we need to advocate for.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there's a case study in Moldova about digital empowerment of older people. So young people who worked over the years with older people in very remote areas to support them and learn about how to use mobile phones and digital. And I actually happened to visit in October this locality where it happened. But what was nice to see is that they've Help Age Moldova and their local partners have been able to engage with the same community for the last 20 years. And initially it was very much focused on health and access to basic healthcare. And then it evolved. And there was a local organization that was just initially a group of volunteers that became a professional organization. And this project, it was a funding opportunity during COVID, but this project really came as a very strong need, as a lot of children of older people in villages migrated. They couldn't communicate with each other. And so basically the phone became the lifeline of older people who were staying back in the villages. In addition to now, there's a project that came on top of that to do, okay, these phones now are so well used, we need to have, and they work with the government, to have a e-health application. So older people had access to medical appointments online, or they could call in a prescription. So it has different applications. So that's probably one of the good examples where it's a longer term view of support, adapting to what older people need and what younger people have the capacity and the energy to do together with older people. And it was great to see some older people were volunteers maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and now they are benefiting from some of these services. But it's very, very hard to convince donors to do what you suggested. Let's go back 5 years, in 5 years, and then do a qualitative evaluation of really what happened, intended and unintended consequences of our project.
Yeah, and I think just the dynamic between individuals, it's one of those things you can't always predict. And like you said, that example in Moldova, so much of it was just based on individual needs, and a lot of factors went into the outcome. So I see Catherine Klein has a question about your work in Uganda and Nepal. So how did you work with restless development youth? And were they from Uganda and Nepal? I'm not sure, Catherine, if you'd like to unmute if you have any other questions to add.
I'm trying to see where Catherine is. I see your picture. I can see your face. I see your picture, Catherine. Thank you for the question. So I've worked with Restless for quite some time, and they have local offices and staff in different countries, but they also work a lot with youth groups directly. They happen in Nepal to have quite a big office, and that's also where their regional center is. And in Uganda, they work through local organizations. So they had worked with youth groups in both these localities before. And for this particular pilot, they mobilized these young people that they knew before. But what was nice is that in Nepal, HelpAge has partners. We don't have an office, but there's local partners, and they work together to make sure that they would mobilize older people and younger people from the similar locality. So the partnership happened very much at the local level, as well as the sort of headquarters level. So again, it's not reinventing the wheel, trying to mobilize young people, older people that live in communities, but look at if there's existing maybe associations or youth groups that we can work with, who may have had these particular experiences or not.
Fantastic, thank you. So Shmuel, I do see your question about the role of state and municipal authorities in creating environments that enable effective multi-generational engagement. We're actually going to be speaking about that further on next week's Global Cafe, but Stephanie, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on how local environments can help promote intergenerational engagement or activities.
Yeah, definitely. And I love this question as someone working in governance. I think that it's a fine line between sort of co-opting these spaces or these groups and then supporting them as a local government, supporting them to become stronger, maybe better funded, but also having access to local services funded by local authorities. So there's been examples in Bangladesh, for instance, where older people associations have gained enough traction with local authorities to first involve a representative of local authorities into their activities, but also got funding and got like the political clout that often is necessary to go to the higher level of governance. So, and it was done in a really positive spirit. Like, we realize that what you're doing, the collaboration that you're forging at the local level between generations, is contributing to the community, to the prosperity, and we want to help. And it's aligning with our own political agenda. And when you get to that level, it's important for these groups, if they're well organized, like multi-generational groups, to have a good understanding of the politics, with small p. What is the agenda of the local authorities? What are their constraints? And where can we align with them? And where is our advocacy is going to get the biggest traction? So definitely really good to engage with local government. And actually in one of the dialogues in Uganda we had invited as observers representatives from local authorities.
Okay, and what was their, I guess, perception, do you think, of your project?
We didn't go back to them specifically. I mean, it's a very early days, and it was just, we don't want to exclude them. We don't want them to feel they are excluded. So we may as well invite them to see for themselves and hear what the issues faced by their own community, because they are part of the community. Mm-hmm. And then think through how they can support solutions.
Interesting, thank you. So one last question before I introduce our next speaker for next week. So recognizing that there are a plethora of global issues ranging from climate change to conflict, that disproportionately impact older people. How would you recommend that older people are included in responses to these challenges?
Yeah, that is a probably a tough question that we often discuss within a humanitarian team and more like long-term development. There's a lot of willingness from humanitarian colleagues to really engage with people. I don't really like the word beneficiary, so I would say people. Listen to their voice, creating these spaces I was talking about. That the problem is time and in the urgency. But there are ways, depending on the level of crisis, to embed like minimum standard, and it's done quite well for women's rights and gender. There's gender markers where we are spending time to look in the rapid assessment what are the particular issues, challenges of women, so we can do the same with older people. But I think it's also a mindset and issue where we often see older people as the victims and the ones who will need the most support to displace them, to move them out of the crisis and take care of them. Whereas we know, and there's quite a lot of evidence, they're often the first responders. They have the experience, they may have been there before, and they can really contribute to providing the solutions. And even if they can't deliver, if they can't do it themselves, but they can contribute into the thinking. So making time, again, creating the spaces to talk to them, to listen to their needs, but also listen to their ideas and make them feel they can be part of the response is really important to consider. May not always be possible, but just consider. And ideally make it more formal, like it's done on gender. For some international organization, establish gender markers, criteria, make it sort of almost like mandatory in a rapid response assessment. And then, more broadly, make sure that there are legal frameworks, there are agreements, conventions that make the particular rights of older people in humanitarian situations taken into account very specifically. And so we can more legitimately fight for them when as an organization working with older people.
Perfect.
But I'm sure we have lots of people who have also great ideas and suggestions.
Yes, thank you. And I see, thank you, Anita, for posting about the Florham Institute for Lifelong Learning. Excited to look into that further.
Yes.
Fabulous, yes.
So yeah, just before we wrap up today, Stephanie, if you could reflect perhaps on some key takeaways that you want the audience to leave today's cafe with. So if you consider that while I introduce next week's session, that would be great. So next week, I have the absolute pleasure of sticking with the theme of intergenerational activities and speaking with Miss Anne Barrett-Rafas on the topic of intergenerational games and age-friendly environments. So if any of you participated in the Age-Friendly Environments ECHO program, you may be familiar with Anna Barrett. So please do join us for what promises to be a fascinating discussion. So back to you, Stephanie. Do you have any key takeaways that we should all perhaps leave today's cafe with?
Yeah, probably quite a basic one is, because I'm going through that journey myself, is to really not underestimate the value of creating positive, safe spaces for generations to come together and connect as an end in itself. So they hear each other, they listen, they can have fun together, they learn together, and because it can potentially lead to transformation, not just in perception, preconceived ideas, mindset, but also, turning some quite a doom and gloom situation into more hopeful outlooks, and then a lot of solidarity coming from that. So I think that's what I would leave you with.
Thank you. That's a wonderful way to start a Friday. And like you said, that idea of solidarity between generations just has so many rippling impacts, but is also just a wonderful end in and of itself. So thank you again, Stephanie, for taking the time and contributing today. I know that I found it just absolutely wonderful to get to learn from you, and also hear from other cafe guests as well. So thank you to everyone online for joining today and interacting. And thank you also to the incredible people working behind the scenes at the IFA who support organize this and every other global cafe as well. So in particular, Miss Bernice Anaya and Roxana Battier. I hope to see you all next Friday and wish you all a very good weekend.